My name is Charmaine Voth. I am divorced. I have 2 children, a son who's 21 and a daughter who's 19. I always knew that I was adopted. My parents told me right from my earliest recollection. And so that just became normal for me. I just thought that I was adopted and that was that. I never questioned a lot of things. I didn't ever ask where I was born because my story always started with where my parents got me. And that was the story. They got me in Regina, and so I just made the assumption that I was born in Regina. And when I was 16, I was becoming a member of my church and was being baptized. And as I was filling out paperwork for that, my father, who was a deacon of our church, as we were filling out the forms, saw me write the word Regina for my birthplace, and he said, "No, you weren't born in Regina, you were born in Calgary." And I was 16 years at the time, and that was the first time I realized where I had been born. I was shocked, and I felt very foolish being 16 and that being the first time that I knew where I was born. There were all kinds of secrets in my adoption experience, because that's how they used to do it. And one of the things, and I was a child who'd never really asked a lot of questions. You could ask me things like how, people felt or what the feeling was in the room, but you couldn't ask me a detail because I would never think to ask details. And I remember when I was 5 years old and I was playing with my friend, and we were talking, and she was talking to me about the fact that I didn't have tan lines. Well, let me back up a little bit. Sometimes I would get teased, and my parents didn't know really what to say about that, about being teased for color. So they would just say, just tell them you have a good tan. And I thought, yes, I do have a good tan, and so that's perfect. That's what I said. And one day my friend said, "You don't have a tan because you don't have tan lines." And I thought, that's right. I don't have tan lines. And so I remember asking my mother, and my mother told me that I don't have to worry, I was 3/4 white and 1/4 Negro. And she said, "You're more white than you are Negro, so you don't have to worry." And I know she did not mean that in a negative way, but certainly I took it as being 1/4 of me was not right. Something was wrong. And I can remember that like it happened yesterday. I can remember how I felt. I can remember the pain that I felt about that, and I remember also how stupid I felt that I was 5 years old and did not know really who I was. I did not know that I was a different race than everybody around me. I lived in a small town, and there was nobody of another race. And so my whole world, everybody I saw was Caucasian, so I just assumed that so was I. And certainly those things weren't talked about. People didn't say, "Oh, we're all Caucasian and you're not." But people did tease me about being a different color. And, up until then, the tan line story worked pretty well. But after that, then I started asking questions. And I remember feeling really uneasy about the whole, who I am. Those questions that you ask when you are a teenager, when you get older, and you want to know who you are. Well, it was compounded for me because I didn't look like anybody in my family, and there was nobody around that looked like me, and for me that was difficult. And I remember in school, if we would have we called them field days back in the day, and it was a sports day, and different towns would come together if they were in your school unit, and then you would race against different people in different towns. And there was one town, a couple of towns down from us, and there was a kid about my age who was black, and every time we were having any kind of unit things happening, he would be there, and all my friends would kind of nudge me and say, hey, 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 check this guy out, which probably he was gorgeous, but at that point I wanted nothing to do with him because he just represented different to me, and I wasn't prepared to handle different. I didn't feel differently than my friends, and so why would I need to you know, check that guy out? And I think that came from a comment that someone made my dad that when they first found out that my parents had adopted me. Let me give you a little background on that. My parents were in their mid-40s when they adopted me, and nobody knew, and so they just came to church with this little brown baby, and it was all quite the big excitement. And they had 2 children of their own who were in their 20s at that time. So basically I grew up by myself. And, you know, if I was lucky, my brother and sister would come home on a weekend and stuff, and so then I would know what it sort of meant to have a brother and sister. I didn't know anything about my birth. And of course my story always started when I was adopted. And the older I got, and if anybody asked me about that, I really didn't want to know, because all I knew was that somebody gave me up for adoption. That was how it was expressed. And didn't know who that was. And because I grew up in a fairly religious home, you know, there was always that whole negative thing of being pregnant before you were married. And so I didn't want to know her. I didn't feel like I needed to get to know her or find her. I'm talking my birth mother now. I had no desire to even look for her. When my parents adopted me, it was a big surprise, you know, in the community and the big news of a small town. And a gentleman came up to my dad and said, "Isn't it going to be sad when your daughter grows up?" And my dad said, "Well, why?" And he said, "Well, when she has to go back to Africa to get married." And that was the thought that was out there at that time, in a small, you know, prairie community where I grew up. And so, I mean, it was just pure ignorance that was there. And we often talked about that little story and joked about it because it was just ridiculous. It was very stupid. It was very ignorant. But really, some of that statement just soaked into my soul, and I started to believe that I was not good enough to marry somebody that was Caucasian. And just those thoughts that a little child can get into their head and then believe as truth. And those are the little thoughts that sort of play in your mind when you're having a bad day, that, you know, something's not quite right about you, and so you just need to, you know, deal with that. And that comment, even though we laughed about it and joked about it, really did play a part in as I was trying to figure out who I was. And that was a big deal.